Thank you. I want to start by acknowledging my co-author on this paper, Melissa Scopoli, who's a graduate student at the University of Maryland. This paper is part of a larger project I've been working on for the past several years, culminating in a book coming out hopefully in the next month or two. This particular paper is guided by three research questions. First is, are foreign-born Hispanics, Asians, and blacks more segregated from whites than the native-born of those respective groups in the U.S.? Are immigrants who've been in the U.S. longer less segregated than recent arrivals? Are residential patterns strongly associated with characteristics of immigrants, such as socioeconomic status and English fluency? This paper is guided by three different theoretical perspectives. The first one I'll just talk about briefly is assimilation theory, as it's been most recently reformulated by sociologists Richard Alba and Victor Niebuhr. They see assimilation as basically a reduction of ethnic or racial distinctions and the cultural and social differences associated with them. They note that it shouldn't be considered necessarily a one-way process. It's not just one group becoming just like another, but just a reduction in the differences between groups over time. It's often a multi-generational process. It's not something you could expect to see within a couple of years or even a decade or two, but often across generations. Also, there are different dimensions of assimilation, economic, cultural, and the focus here is spatial or residential. One of the key tenets is that differences in acculturation and socioeconomic status across racial and ethnic groups help shape residential patterns. So one traditional sort of scenario, story about immigration is that immigrants often first settle in ethnic enclaves. This is where their social networks have led them, where they feel most comfortable. Perhaps they work in an ethnic enclave economy. But over time, perhaps as they gain English fluency in the U.S. context and become familiar with different neighborhoods and some of the amenities in those neighborhoods, they might be more likely to move out of the ethnic enclaves into a broader set of neighborhoods. And this results over the long run, and perhaps across generations, in assimilation. There are competing theoretical models. First, there's ethnic disadvantage, where increasing familiarity with the culture and customs of a new country does not lead to increasing assimilation. In this perspective, typically discrimination and other structural barriers to equal access to opportunities is thought to inhibit assimilation. Groups may choose to preserve their identity as well. Somewhere in between is segmented assimilation, which, to simplify a bit, predicts vastly different group trajectories. We might see assimilation of some groups, but not for others. And here, structural and individual level factors are important as well. So groups coming in with high mean socioeconomic status, high incomes, higher levels of education are more likely to experience a measure of incorporation than other groups. Again, here I'm talking about spatial or residential incorporation, and commonly discussed in terms of residential segregation, and a couple of the people so far have commented on this term, which does have perhaps some negative connotations. I am trying to use it in a bit of a more neutral academic way in the context of this paper. Previous empirical findings in the U.S. segregation literature, just briefly, there are higher levels of black-white segregation than Hispanic-white or Asian-white segregation. There have been declines in black-white segregation over the past few decades, but slight increases in Hispanic-white and Asian-white segregation. Socioeconomic status plays some role for all groups, but particularly for Asians and Hispanics, where higher socioeconomic status groups tend to be less segregated than the lower socioeconomic status ones. And nativity may play a role, but no systematic assessment by race ethnicity, which is what I'm doing here. So I mentioned the three theoretical perspectives, and they do have very specific predictions. For spatial assimilation, nativity and year of entry matter. Nativity is whether foreign-born or native-born. And that's really a key variable in terms of this paper, looking at the dynamics of the immigrant incorporation process. So do socioeconomic status and acculturation characteristics are expected to matter. According to ethnic disadvantage, little evidence of converging residential patterns for any group, and segmented assimilation may be evident among some groups, more so for Hispanics and Asians, perhaps in the US context, but not others, such as blacks. The data come restricted use data from the 1990 and 2000 United States censuses, looking at metropolitan areas as defined in 1999. There were 331 of them. Census tracts are used to represent neighborhoods. They have on average about 4,000 people. And here I'm focusing on blacks, Hispanics, and Asians and their segregation from native-born non-Hispanic whites. In, of course, another context, looking at different groups might make more sense. I've also looked at some segregation indices by country of origin. I don't have too much time to talk about that right now. Here's a note at the bottom that segregation indices are less reliable for very small groups, so you don't bother calculating a segregation index for a metropolitan area where there are, let's say, 10 Asians. There are two components to this analysis. First, there's...
Specify one thing, are you talking about black immigrants or just blacks?
Yes, native-born and black immigrants. Native-born African Americans in the U.S., and also looking at black immigrants to the U.S. So there's a descriptive component where we're looking at indexes by race, ethnicity, nativity, and their entry. Only looking at places where there are at least 1,000 group members present. Also a multivariate component to look at the group and metropolitan level factors associated with the metropolitan area variation and dissimilarity. Dissimilarity is a focus here as a measure of residential segregation. It's already been talked about a bit, ranges from 0 to 1. We've also done analyses with the isolation index, but I won't show those today. This just gives you, I guess, a picture of what dissimilarity means. In the upper panel, you have a metropolitan area where you would say it has high segregation. In the lower panel, low segregation. In the upper one, each neighborhood, separated by the white lines, is ethnically homogeneous. So here you have a dissimilarity score of 1, and in the lower panel, dissimilarity is never as a measure of evenness. You see groups evenly spread across the neighborhood, so this would be a dissimilarity score of 0. Let me jump into the results. This shows the dissimilarity index for the foreign-born by year of entry and census year, 1990 and 2000. This first starts with the foreign-born population as a whole, no distinctions by ethnicity. What we see is between 1990 and 2000, a small increase in dissimilarity from 0.41 to 0.44. The rule of thumb is that dissimilarity scores below 0.3 are considered low, above 0.6 are considered high, so this is well in the moderate range. When we look by year of entry, that the most recent immigrants show the highest levels of segregation. In these next couple of bars, you see perhaps slightly lower ones. Just to show the difference between this bar and this bar is of immigrants who arrived between 1980 and 80.